I acknowledge the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples, who are the traditional custodians of the Canberra area, and pay respects to the elders, past and present, of all Australia's Indigenous peoples. Almighty God, we humbly beseech Thee to vouchsafe Thy blessing upon this Parliament. Direct and prosper our deliberations to the advancement of Thy glory and the true welfare of the people of Australia. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be Thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For Thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory for ever and ever. Amen. Give the call to the Leader of the House.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I ask leave to move the motion for the suspension of standing orders and sessional orders as circulated.
Call the Manager of Opposition Business.
Move that so much of the standing and sessional orders be suspended in relation to the arrangement of business for this sitting in the terms as circulated to honourable members in the chamber.
I'll put the question. All of those with opinion say aye. Against no. I think the ayes have it. Give the call to the Leader of the House.
I present the revised program of sittings for 2022 and move that the program be agreed to.
I call the Manager of Opposition Business. Sleep. Oh. I'll put the question. All of those with opinion say aye. Against no. The ayes have it. I'd like to inform the House that present in the Distinguished Visitors Gallery today is Her Excellency Mrs Vicky Trudell, the High Commissioner for the United Kingdom. On behalf of the House, it is an honour to welcome you today, and I express my greatest sympathy to you and the people of the United Kingdom. And I call the Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I move that an address to His Majesty King Charles III in the following terms be agreed to. Your Majesty, we, the members of the House of Representatives in the Parliament of the Commonwealth of Australia, express our deep sympathy with Your Majesty and members of the royal family for the great loss sustained in the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, our late sovereign. On behalf of the Australian people, we pay tribute to and acknowledge Her late Majesty's exceptional life of dedication to duty and commitment to Australia and the Commonwealth. We extend our congratulations to Your Majesty on your accession to the throne. We express our respect for Your Majesty and pledge to work to achieve peace and prosperity for Australia and the Commonwealth.
I call the Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, with the passing of Queen Elizabeth II, an historic reign and a long life devoted to duty, family, faith and service has come to an end. The second Elizabethan age is over. Despite all the solemn pageantry that has served to remind us of this sad fact, it is hard to grasp that Queen Elizabeth II now belongs to the realm of memory. We give thanks for her long and exceptionally well-lived life, and we do so here in the building she opened for a nation she loved as part of her greater family. A new permanent home for the Parliament she described as both the living expression of that federation and the embodiment of the democratic principles of freedom, equality and justice. And when she joined Bob Hawke to do the honours in 1988, out there by the Michael Nelson Jacamara mosaic that so caught her eye, she could see the old Parliament House that her own father opened in 1927. What a shining thread through our houses of democracy, through our own history. Indeed, Her Majesty's reign was so long that to most of us, she was simply always there. She was a rare and reassuring constant amidst rapid change. But even the brightest star must eventually set, leaving us with the memory of the globe. The Queen was our head of state for a majority of our existence as a federation. It's also important to remember the personal as well. A much-loved wife, mother, grandmother and great-grandmother, the gravitational centre around which a family turned, which I believe is one of the reasons that she was always so much more than a monarch to us. The Queen lived a life of privilege, but one that was always balanced by an unyielding sense of duty of service, a desire to give. That noble counterweight of the spirit was something she bore faithfully for the United Kingdom, for Australia, and for the great family of nations we call the Commonwealth, a family that grew so swiftly on her watch. Even as the focus began to shift more towards the individual, the Queen embodied a sense of duty that placed community and selflessness first. The Queen never lost her belief in society. Underpinning all of it was an inner strength, one that was tested early. The first time was when her uncle, Edward VIII, abdicated, a seismic act that shifted the crown onto her father's head, transforming him into George VI and the young princess into the heir to the throne. And it all unfurled as Britain was about to face the threat of what Winston Churchill called the abyss of a new dark age. The second was when her beloved father died, aged just 56, finally spent by the burdens of war and illness. Princess Elizabeth was only 25, the news reaching her in Kenya the day before she and Prince Philip were due to board the SS Gothic for their journey to Australia. The dream of relatively calm years raising a family with Philip were over. The princess returned to England as Queen, the responsibilities of the throne on one shoulder, the sudden absence of her father on the other. Somehow, in her grief, she found the strength to measure up to the expectations of a nation and the 1,000-year-old institution into which she'd been born. When asked what name she would be taking as Queen, she bucked the trend by replying, "My own, of course." It was just one hint of the stability and continuity that she would provide. Over the past 184 years, the throne has been held by women for 133 of them, but remarkably, just 2 women. Queen Victoria, who was on the throne for over 6 decades, and her great-great-granddaughter, Queen Elizabeth, the first British monarch to reign for 7. When it came to the relationship between Queen Elizabeth II and Australia, 16 truly was the number most recalled. Through her reign, she consulted with 16 Australian Prime Ministers, starting with Sir Robert Menzies, 16 Governors-General, starting with Sir William McKell, and she made 16 visits to our shores, starting with a 58-day tour that saw her visit 68 towns and cities and pass through so many more. According to someone quoted at the time in the Forbes Advocate, by comparison, organising the Olympic Games would be quite simple. She got to know us, appreciate us, embrace us, and the feeling was very much mutual. She handed out trophies in schools. She chatted with outback families on the radio. There were people to comfort, achievements to be celebrated. There were openings and festivals, rodeos and surf carnivals. She got to know our landscapes and our character. All the time, she was gently endearing herself ever deeper into our national life. Along the way, Her Majesty had one of the most Australian experiences of all, sitting next to Bob Hawke at the races when his horse was winning. The photograph of these two connoisseurs of the turf in that moment is a perfect study in balance. The Queen sitting serenely, the Prime Minister like a firecracker in a suit. Bob was criticised, but as he later reflected, I took great pleasure in pointing a little later to a photo of the Queen showing similar exaltation when one of her horses won in England. When she first came to us, our pockets jingled with pennies and shillings. Television was still in the future, as was the filling of Lake Burley Griffin. When the Queen first addressed our Parliament, she was one of just a handful of women in the room, and that wasn't the only deficit among the faces gazing up at her. The White Australia policy was still in place, and the gift to the Queen of an Albert Namatjira painting notwithstanding, this nation was still a long way off any sort of reckoning with the truth of this continent's first inhabitants. Since then, we've changed in so many ways for the better, and the Queen saw it all. She was the patron of more than 20 Australian charities and associations. Throughout her reign, Queen Elizabeth II showed a deep affection for her country. From her famous first trip to Australia, the only reigning sovereign to ever visit, it was clear Her Majesty held a special place in her heart for Australia. 15 more tours before cheering crowds in every part of the country confirmed the special place that she held in ours. As monarch for more than half the life of our federation, the relationship between Australia and Britain matured and evolved throughout Her Majesty's reign. The Queen greeted each and every change with understanding, good grace, and an abiding faith in the Australian people's good judgment. This was the deft and diplomatic way she bound the diversity of the modern Commonwealth. The world today is almost unrecognisable from what it was in 1952. And there is no doubt, given modern technology, including television, that the Queen is the most famous woman who, during her life, has walked this earth. Throughout all the tumult and noise and tectonic shifts in those 70 years, so many old certainties were broken. New, more tentative ones took their place. Throughout it all was Her Majesty, a Queen who let her humanity show, who stood with us in times of hardship, even as she had endured her own. Of course, there was always Philip, whom the Queen once described as her strength and stay. Between the layers of formality and protocol, we sometimes got glimpses of the affection and the tenderness between Queen and Duke. After Prince Philip died, the most striking image from the funeral was the most human. No pomp, no regal splendour, just the Queen, alone in her sorrow. As Her Majesty once put it, grief is the price we pay for love. 70 years as sovereign is a towering record, yet what will always stand tallest in our hearts and our memories is the commitment and spirit to service and duty that the Queen so unflaggingly brought to her role, and the pride and sense of unity that she engendered. The Queen served with dignity, fidelity, humour, and a grace that was indefatigable. And she took nothing for granted. When she opened this place in 1988, she said something that rings even truer today, given global events. And I quote, "Parliamentary democracy is a compelling ideal, but it is a fragile institution. It cannot be imposed, and it is only too easily destroyed. It needs the positive dedication of the people as a whole and of their elected representatives to make it work." We knew her voice and we knew her mannerisms, the stately expressions and the impish twinkle, the hats and the headscarves, the corgis and the horses, the hands that so lovingly gripped the steering wheels of generations of Land Rover, the eagerness to perform with James Bond for the London Olympics, a princess who trained as a motor mechanic in World War II, a queen who inspired Duke Ellington to compose a suite for her and present her with the solitary copy of its only recording, a sovereign who appreciated the value of being roused from every sleep every morning by bagpipes, knowing no alarm clock could ever be quite so emphatic, it is perhaps fitting that in what proved to be the twilight of a remarkably long life, she was drawn home to the corner of Scotland that spoke so powerfully to her heart. There at Balmoral, amid the sometimes severe splendour of the Highlands, she found that which eluded her in London. Moments of solitude away from a life in the spotlight, the most famous woman in the world, able to enjoy the luxury of the intimacy of family and of friends. At the Sydney Opera House in 2000, Her Majesty bared the heart of her feelings for our country, saying, "Since I first stepped ashore here, I have felt part of this rugged, honest, creative land. I have shared in the joys and the sorrows, the challenges and the changes that have shaped this country's history. But even as history continued to shape and change us, and as the bond between our two nations evolved, the affection and respect in which we held Her Majesty remained. The Queen transcended barriers. You could be a Republican and still feel nothing but regard and respect for her. She celebrated our good times and stood with us in our times of trial, bringing sympathy and comfort when it was so badly needed. Through fire and flood, drought and cyclone and pandemic, she was there. As she said 20 years ago, "My admiration, affection and regard for the people of Australia will remain as it has been, constant, sure and true." Let it be said, we felt the same way. The Queen always had a special place in the hearts of Australians, and she always will. And I thank His Excellency the Governor-General and Mrs Hurley, as well as the Australians led by Dylan Alcott, the Australian of the Year, who graced London as part of the delegation and did Australia proud. Our thoughts are with all the royal family as they mourn. In particular, we think of King Charles, who feels the weight of his sorrow as he takes on the weight of the crown. When I met with him a few days ago in London, I conveyed on behalf of the Australian people our grief and our gratitude, our condolences and our respect. Our conversation was a reminder that Australia, not least Victoria, where he did some of his schooling all those years ago. As His Majesty put it on one occasion, "If you want to develop character, go to Australia." I admire King Charles's passion and his commitment to the natural environment and sustainability. At the dawn of his reign, we wish His Majesty well. And now that the great Elizabethan reign is over, may Her Majesty rest in eternal peace.
And give the call to the Honourable, the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the Prime Minister for his moving words and second the motion. And it's a great honour to be here in this chamber to appreciate the opportunity to reiterate and build upon my remarks at yesterday's solemn National Memorial Service. On the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, I said, never in modern history has there been a more dignified monarch, a more dutiful leader or a more decent human. The past 15 days of tears and tributes from around the world are testimony to the truth of that sentiment. We've been moved by the flowers laid, the wreaths placed, notes left, speeches delivered, condolences penned, candles lit, prayers said, salutes fired and silences held. No more so than by the poignant final farewell, Her Majesty's state funeral. If grief is the price we pay for love, then the outpouring of global grief for our dearly departed sovereign speaks to just how much she was loved. Queen Elizabeth's rule was extraordinary, the like of which we will never see again. A reign spanning 70 years with tens of thousands of public engagements. It's a legacy the little Lilibet could not have imagined. The sweet and shy child who loved horses, adored corgis, and liked to keep things tidy with the dustpan and brush, wanted to be a lady living in the country. But a king's abdication and her father's reluctant accession in 1936 brought an end to the idyllic family life spent at 145 Piccadilly in London and the Royal Lodge in Windsor. 10-year-old Elizabeth, heir to the throne, was appalled to hear that she would be moving into Buckingham Palace forever. Fate thrust a life of duty upon Elizabeth, but to duty Elizabeth would dedicate her life. For only 4 years later, in 1940, the teenage princess, matured by war, made her first radio broadcast, reassuring evacuated children that all will be well. Indeed, 80 years on, in one of her last broadcasts, she would echo those sentiments of comfort to those isolated and separated by COVID-19. We will meet again, she said. After turning 18, she contributed to the war effort as an army mechanic and learnt to drive trucks. Aged just 25 years old, she succeeded her father on the throne, inheriting a shrinking empire and a country trying to carve out a new patriotic identity in the Cold War world. Upon one young person, so much was expected by so many. Elizabeth neither yearned for a return to empire nor sought to reinstate it. She had the strength to venture beyond the safeties of the past, knowing that the path to modernity must be forged differently. An emphasis not on the people serving the monarch, rather on being a monarch who tirelessly served the people. She set a new course, giving herself, her heart and her soul to the Commonwealth, to champion, as she described it, that equal partnership of nations and races built on friendship, loyalty and the desire for freedom and peace. That commitment saw her travel the world. She covered more than 1.5 million kilometres, visited more than 100 countries, met many thousands of people and hundreds of leaders. With characteristic humility, she greeted all those she met with courtesy, treated them all as equals and offered an attentive ear. It was, however, Churchill, Reagan, Obama and Mandela who left a lasting impression. She said of the latter that the most gracious of men has shown us all how to accept the facts of the past without bitterness. Her historic trip to the Republic of Ireland in 2011 exemplified that spirit of reconciliation. Our sovereign had a deep affection for Australia, visiting on 16 occasions between 1954 and 2011. She opened our new Parliament House in the Sydney Opera House and in Melbourne, lit the eternal flame at the base of the cenotaph at Melbourne's Shrine of Remembrance, and met construction workers in a tunnel of the Snowy Mountains hydroelectric scheme. Beyond our capital cities, she visited places in every state and territory: Alice Springs and Albany, Dubbo and Devonport, Mackay and Mildura, Tamworth and Townsville, Whyalla and Wollongong, and more besides. She looked forward to meeting people from remote locations who, she said, have been such a distinct and enduring part of the Australian way of life. The Queen would admit that she always felt a special bond with a people whose creative energy and collective ambition is leavened by genuine warmth, generosity and humour. She admired that Australian trait to honour those who go about their essential business without fuss or media attention. But of course, wherever the Queen went, crowds choked the streets, cheering and clapping and waving flags to express their adoration, as of course did Prime Minister Menzies. His fulsome and awkward tribute in 1963, quoting English poet Thomas Ford, perhaps now strikes a different chord. I did but see her passing by, and yet I love her till I die. Queen Elizabeth lived through the pivotal events of the 20th and 21st centuries: wars and conflicts, depression and recession, decolonisation and independence, the race to the moon and the attainment of civil rights, the brilliance of Olympic Games and the barbarity of terrorism, the sorrow of natural disasters and the solitude of pandemic. She was a realist and an optimist, stating, "I've lived long enough to know that things never remain quite the same for very long. The future is, as ever, obscure. The only certainty is that it will present the world with new and daunting problems. But if we continue to stick to our fundamental ideals, I have every confidence that we can resolve them." Elizabeth presided over an era of remarkable technological change. In 1983, she reflected, "In the years I was born, radio communication was barely out of its infancy. There was no television, civil aviation had hardly started, and space satellites were still in the realm of science fiction. When my grandfather visited India in 1911, it took 3 weeks by sea to get there. Last month, I flew from Delhi to London in a matter of hours." 1957 saw her first televised Christmas message. Year after that inviting, warm and familiar face of our Queen with her radiant smile it would beam into our living rooms year after year. Most never met her, of course, but felt they knew her. We drew on the wisdom of her words and on the comfort of her voice. As technology evolved, she embraced its changes. As we got to see more of the Queen, we saw more of her cheeky humour and her sense of fun, her joy at the racecourse, her quip at the G7 leaders' photo shoot with her dry sense of humour. "Are you supposed to be looking as if you're enjoying yourself?" she said. Her Olympics cameo with Daniel Craig delivering a perfect "Good evening, Mr Bond." And most magically, her tea with Paddington Bear, confessing that she too hid marmalade sandwiches. Despite being royal, the Queen was rarely ostentatious. Many of her habits, as we know now, were frugal, eating cornflakes out of Tupperware, turning off lights to save electricity, and using 2-bar electric heaters instead of lighting grand fireplaces. Like us, she had her own television show favourites, Downtown Abbey, Dad's Army and Doctor Who. Churchill was right in his assessment. She was a lady whom we respected because she is our Queen and whom we love because she is herself. Each year, the Queen took a summer break at Balmoral Castle in Scotland. There, she fleetingly lived out her alternative life as a country lady. Her dedication to duty rarely saw her down tools in paving the royal road of service. Indeed, her service was grounded in regimented routine. Each day she would receive the red box, judiciously going through its contents of briefing papers and legislation. A diary full of official meetings, engagements or visits would follow. The Queen found joy in reading and responding to correspondence from the public, saying, "Every day hundreds of letters come to my desk, and I make a point of reading as many of them as I possibly can. I value all those letters for keeping me in touch with your views and opinions." And just as people from all walks of life were inspired by the Queen, so too was she inspired by them. She said, "We hear much of public life, the hurly-burly of Parliament, the media, big business, city life, but for most people, their contribution at whatever age is made quietly through their local communities. To most of them, service is its own reward. There are all sorts of elements to a free society, but I believe that among the most important is the willingness of ordinary men and women to play a part in their life of their community, rather than confining themselves to their own narrow interests. Above all else, what made Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II tick was the importance she placed on family, on faith, on democratic institutions and on values. Those constants were permeated throughout her reign, which was characterised, of course, by great change. The Queen saw the family as the focal point of her and our existence, the core of a thriving community. In her duty to country and Commonwealth, Elizabeth did not neglect her responsibilities as a daughter, as a sister, as a wife, a mother, a grandmother, or a great-grandmother. Yes, her own life, of course, was not without family controversies and tragedies. Her annus horribilis in 1992, Princess Diana's death in 1997, and the losses of her mother and sister in 2002. But for a Queen admired for her almost transcendent qualities, those events would reinforce just how human she was. The Queen suffered her greatest loss in 2021, the death of her beloved husband, the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Philip. Gone was her strength and stay of all those years, the man she so admired for his irrepressible sense of service, intellectual curiosity and capacity to squeeze fun out of any situation. In her last Christmas message, the Queen spoke about the joy of family, of death and birth. Her dedication to duty and family was linked with devotion to her God. For Elizabeth, the teachings of Christ and her personal accountability before God provided a framework in which she tried to lead her life. She said, "At the centre of our lives must be the message of caring for others, the message at the heart of Christianity and of all the great religions." The Queen spoke often about the Good Samaritan parable, how we are all neighbours who depend upon each other, no matter our race, creed or colour, that we all have something to learn from one another, whatever our faith, whatever our background, whether we be young or old, from town or countryside. Throughout her reign, the Queen recognised that parliamentary democracy was a compelling ideal but a fragile institution. She valued the lessons of history, counselling us to have the good sense to learn from the experience of those who have gone before us. As the beneficiaries of a remarkable inheritance, she encouraged us to hold on to all the good that has been handed down to us in trust. We remember her profound words of 1957. Trouble is caused by unthinking people who carelessly throw away ageless ideals as if they were old and outworn machinery. They would have religion thrown aside, morality in personal and public life made meaningless, honesty counted as foolishness, and self-interest set up in place of self-restraint. And she stated in 1990 that nowadays there are all too many causes that press their claims with a loud voice and a strong arm, rather than with the language of reason. Mr Speaker, the record attests to the achievements of the second Elizabethan age. She left the monarchy in a stronger position than the precarious one she inherited. But perhaps Her Majesty's greatest triumph will be a renaissance of the virtues and values she embodied in life. Virtues and values which we still admire, but which are often wanting in a more retributive, revisionist and self-entitled world today. Those of duty, of service, of sacrifice, of fortitude, of stoicism, of grace, of humility, of generosity, of forgiveness and empathy. May our dearly departed Queen inspire the very best in Australians for generations to come. Mr Speaker, over the course of the last fortnight, Australians have been glued to their television sets, to their devices, where they've embraced the story, the recounting of the many interactions that the Queen has had with people in the United Kingdom, here in Australia, and of course abroad. It is a time to celebrate our connection with our British heritage. I acknowledge the presence in the chamber today of the High Commissioner, a very dear friend of our country and a great ambassador for her own country. The way in which the Prime Minister, the Governor-General and the delegation that they led represented our country in the United Kingdom over the course of the celebration of the Queen's life and the commemoration services that were conducted in London was a great credit to each of them and was a great moment of honour for our country. Today we say with heartfelt gratitude, good night to the Queen. May she rest in peace, in eternal peace, and long live the King.
The question is that the motion moved by the Honourable the Prime Minister be agreed to, and I give the call to the Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I acknowledge the beautiful words of the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition. And can I also acknowledge the presence in our chamber of the High Commissioner from the United Kingdom, Vicky Treadle. It is really wonderful to have you here today. After 64 years on the throne, when Queen Victoria died at her retreat on the Isle of Wight in January of 1901, the response across the British Empire was profound and it was consistent. It was observed that for most people, they had lived their entire lives during her reign, and that Queen Victoria had been a constant during a period of unmarked change, defined by the Industrial Revolution and the tremendous developments in technology which it initiated. That change was seen in Australia through Queen Victoria's presence accompanying Federation. She died just 3 weeks after the birth of our nation, and her touch is everywhere. 2 states are named after her. Our country's first capital was named after her first British Prime Minister. And in one form or another, there is a memorial to Queen Victoria in every major city in the country. As we think about the events and the response of the last 2 weeks, with the death of Queen Elizabeth II, there was an earlier expression in those events which occurred more than a century ago. And as the Prime Minister rightly observed, it is remarkable to think that since 1837, in the 185 years hence, the throne has been occupied for more than 70% of that time by just 2 women. On the death of Queen Victoria, the Newcastle Chronicle in the northeast of England reported that whilst Few of its inhabitants had ever seen Her Majesty or knew of her good works. And here's where the comparison starts to differ. Because while Queen Victoria provided that incredible constant of presence, she did so during an era where the public glare was relatively limited. There are no photos of an early Queen Victoria. There are just a few videos which show a grainy image of an older Queen Victoria in the distance. And there is no recording of Queen Victoria's voice which is in existence. And yet those technologies, which emerged during her reign, made the corresponding task of Queen Elizabeth to provide that constant presence, that constancy which has been the handrail for change, a task of a completely different order of magnitude. Queen Elizabeth's coronation was the most watched event on TV to that point in time. The video which documents the 1954 visit to Australia is regarded to this day as the most important pre-TV footage in Australia's social history. And indeed, on that visit, almost 3/4 of the entire population over those 2 months actually came out to see Queen Elizabeth. Queen Victoria never left Europe. In her 70 years on the throne, Queen Elizabeth embarked on 250 official overseas trips to 131 different countries. Her image, her voice, are the most seen and most heard of any human in history. It's estimated that during her reign she has shaken the hands of hundreds of thousands of people. It must be closing in on 1 million people. And through all that time, her presence has been constant and predictable, calm and full of grace. In 70 years, she did not put a foot wrong. It is an achievement of public engagement on a gargantuan scale. And what it really means is that if you think about the entire history of the kings and queens of England, from 1066 and William the Conqueror right through to the present, Queen Elizabeth, perhaps alongside her namesake, stands right up there as one of the greatest. The essence of her engagement was a comforting reassurance, which was never felt so much as during times of crisis, such as in 1966, during the Aberfan mine disaster in Wales, where a mudslide claimed the lives of 151 people, most of whom were kids. The Queen visited Aberfan 8 days after that event, and her presence and her visit gave comfort to grieving parents. Decades later, survivors of that disaster would describe the Queen's visit as a positive and integral part of their experience of that tragedy. And in turn, the Queen would say of Aberfan that she was impressed by the remarkable fortitude, dignity and indomitable spirit that characterises the people of this village and the surrounding valleys. After the September 11 attacks, the Queen said to the people of New York, "Nothing that can be said can begin to take away the anguish and the pain of these moments. Grief is the price we pay for love." In the aftermath of the Black Saturday bushfires in Victoria, the Queen asked to be kept abreast on a daily basis personally about the disaster, its aftermath and the government response. And she sought those daily briefings for months after the event. And that, accompanied by a contribution that she made to the local Red Cross, gave a sense of connection to the people on the fireground with the Queen. And then more recently, during the pandemic, her words come with a wisdom of an intelligent mind that has experienced a long life. As she said to the world, "Though self-isolating may at times be hard, many people of all faiths and of none are discovering that it presents an opportunity to slow down, pause and reflect in prayer or meditation. Using the great advance of science, and our instinctive compassion to heal, we will succeed. And that success will belong to every one of us. During these times of crisis, she was the exhausting focus of attention. And it's worth dwelling on that. Because to give a moment to shake the hand of a complete stranger was literally the daily routine of the Queen's life, and yet for the person who received that moment, it was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. And to understand that difference, and yet to give every time, hour in, hour out, day in, day out, year in, year out, shows an astonishing generosity of spirit and a bigness of heart. She must have been a truly remarkable person. And for those who had the opportunity to know her just a little, that has been the consistent testimony. When I was much younger, I had the thrill of having lunch at university with Gough Whitlam. And of all the topics about which I might speak to that great man, we found ourselves talking about the Queen. And he spoke in such glowing terms about how wonderful a person she was. And I was really struck by his description, but I was just as struck by the fact that it was Gough Whitlam who was giving the description. You know, his words align with all that we've heard spoken about the Queen in the last 2 weeks. I think it does give something of a sense of why we are experiencing, why there has been such an outpouring of emotion across Australia, irrespective of one's views about our constitutional arrangements, across the Commonwealth and most particularly across the United Kingdom. Yes, it is about the fact that this is a moment in time, a moment in history. We are, for most of us, experiencing an event that we've never seen before, and maybe we won't see again. And so in these moments there is a natural tendency to walk down an introspective path about our own life's journey. But it's also about the person. It is about her. It is about acknowledging an astonishing life of unparalleled service to others. The Queen was right when she said that grief is the price we pay for love. But in this instance, grief is also the appreciation across the breadth of Australia of a deeply grateful nation. Vale, Queen Elizabeth II.
The question is that the motion moved by the Honourable Prime Minister be agreed to, and I give the call to the Leader of the Nationals.
I thank you, Mr Speaker, and as the Leader of the Nationals I extend my appreciation of the Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition in joining with them in the tributes to the life of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, Queen of Australia and Head of the Commonwealth. Firstly, may I say that the National Party of Australia unites with millions of Australians in sending our heartfelt condolences to the royal family, to whom Her Majesty was a beloved mother, grandmother and great-grandmother. My reflections today will focus largely on the unique role Her Majesty played in the hearts of millions of Australians that live outside our capital cities. Since passing away peacefully at the age of 96, Australia has mourned the loss of a truly exceptional leader, a monarch who had a real, profound and enduring affinity with our regions. Over the past 14 days, we have seen magnificent and powerful tributes in honour of Her Majesty. We have witnessed our nation come together in the spirit of unity on a scale that has been truly remarkable. We have seen public outpouring of grief and admiration through an avalanche of touching condolences, breathtaking spectacles and solemn beauty. We know that Australia shared so much with Her Majesty. Indeed, it was during a visit 16 years ago where she memorably said that, as Queen of Australia, I have always felt a special bond with a people whose creative energy and collective ambition is leavened by genuine warmth, generosity and humour. But that bond gets stronger as we go out to our regions. Throughout her life, regional Australians have celebrated Her Majesty in many different ways. Be it in our town halls, our schools or even our pubs, it is heartwarming that you could be in Mildura, Geraldton or even Whyalla and spy a solitary portrait sitting on a wall. This is often a small yet strong tribute that can embody a community sentiment without anything needing being said at all. Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II was a shining light of great hope, but also comfort for communities across regional, rural and remote Australia. In the midst of regional Australia's toughest times, Her Majesty provided many messages of support and strength. These efforts showed her true kindness, humanity and leadership. Across the 16 royal visits to Australia and accompanied by His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh, Her Majesty graced towns across the regions more than 60 times. In a stunning display of affection for our land, in the incredible royal tour of 54, the first ever by a reigning monarch, the Queen and Duke of Edinburgh called through 35 regional towns. And many of these towns were lucky enough to get a second visit. These occasions took many different formats and held many a different tone. Some of these were showcases and celebrations. Some were deeply sombre ceremonies, marks of respect and remembrance. Yet almost all of these moments were simply a dream come true. They were real-life storybook moments that did not matter if you were a small child in Coffs Harbour or a middle-aged bloke in Mackay. This was an opportunity to get a glimpse or even meet the Queen. And in perhaps the greatest testament to Her Majesty will be remembered by the regions, we are left with stories from each where these visits that she was certainly more than engaged with everywhere she went. In my own electorate of Maranoa, Her Majesty went through Cunnamulla and Longreach twice. Don Walker, or Outback Dan as he is commonly known, tells the story of the visit to Camden Park Station in Longreach. On April 15, 1970, the Queen arrived in her Rolls Royce, and it was my dad's job for the day to ensure the driveway leading into Camden Park Station was graded so the Rolls Royce didn't bottom out. People came from as far as Roma, Rockhampton and Mount Isa to attend a luncheon hosted by the matron of the local hospital. The matron sat with the Queen, introducing her to the dignitaries, and over lunch they discussed issues regarding rural women, their lifestyles, the community and what they had been able to pioneer while Prince Philip mingled with the men. Her Majesty marvelled that it was the only place she'd been to in the world where she could actually see 360-degree views without a man-made structure in sight. One of the reporters from the travelling media pack thought she'd visit the local pub to ask the locals what the visit actually meant to them personally. As they could all they could talk about was the chair that Her Majesty sat in and what they were going to do with it. The chair was nicknamed the Throne and can be found to this day at the Homestead. Her Majesty returned to Longreach in 1988, our bicentennial year, to officially open the Australian Stockman's Hall of Fame. Just one of the many projects she opened that have meant so much to our communities. But there was one small problem in Longreach. There was only 30 motel rooms. Visitors bought their own swags and tents and simply did what they do best in the outback, and they camped out. It's reported more than 12,000 people came to Longreach on that occasion alone. These are just some of the stories that have been swapped and passed down through generations and will do so for generations to come. And they occur right across throughout and without wonderful regionals such as Dubbo, Benalla, Broken Hill, Armidale, Orange, Dubbo, Shepparton, Swan Hill, Broome, Cooma, or as the member for Hinkler has recently retold the story of Her Majesty's visit to Bundaberg. Our royal visitors were to spend 2 hours in Bundaberg, but this 2 hours captivated the region. There were days upon days of rehearsals that even included intense practice and scrutiny of handshakes. This was also set to be the first time that children were to take part in a civic reception in Queensland. As recalled by the Bundaberg Now, the local newspaper in the 40 days before the visit had published 57 articles about the forthcoming event, and the week before her visit the paper published daily hints for residents on how to cope with the whole experience. A full-scale dress rehearsal was held at the Bundaberg Showgrounds days before the royal visit, and the complete royal reception procedure was run through numerous times until it was faultless. 10 trains arrived in Bundaberg early Thursday morning from Maryborough, Gympie, Isis, Monto, Kingaroy, Morganville, Mount Perry and Gladstone, with more than 5,000 people on board, and most had returned home by 9 p.m. the same night. In the end, over 30,000 people pooled into the Bundaberg Showgrounds that day. Legend has it that Her Majesty also took an interest in the making of a certain local tipple and asked the mayor fed bus if he enjoyed it. The mayor was never one to miss an opportunity and replied that he did, but it was too expensive and cost 1 shilling a nip, and when it should only cost a penny because the excise duty from the federal government. Nothing's changed. Years later, Her Majesty's son, our now King Charles III, visited the Bundy Rum Distillery and blended his own rum. Perhaps His Majesty had been given the heads up. But there were visits where Her Majesty also marvelled at our great regional challenges and practical innovations that our communities have used to overcome them. After all, Her Majesty famously joined the Auxiliary Territorial Service, learning how to drive and how to service an army truck. In 1963, visits to Snowy Hydro and Yucumbene Dam, and then up north to Kununurra and Diversion Dam. In 1970, visits to the Royal Flying Doctor Service base in Mount Isa and visits to the Mount Isa mines. But this interest and fondness was not one-way street. Our communities worshipped these occasions. Just about every visit shares a similar picture. Usually spacious and comfortable country main streets are flooded with thousands. This fondness is also reflected in our communities through our rural agricultural shows. Entry and participation into these shows has been traditionally a chance to showcase a region's finest for judging as a prize suitable for the Queen. In the member for Riverina's electorate in 1954, Her Majesty attended the Wagga Wagga Agricultural Show, observing the wood chopping and wool classing. Yet again, thousands lined the streets and has been heralded as Wagga's greatest day. And these moments have been preserved by our towns. When Her Majesty visited the member for Capricorn's electorate, there were 2 chairs made especially elegant, stylish, and of course looking very comfortable. They were there for them to sit outside the Rockhampton Town Hall. They are now on display at the Rockhampton Museum of Art for all to see. There are countless yarns, and of course some of those stories shared might not be entirely true, but some that no one would happen to believe did not in fact happen. That is the beauty of legend, and that is the beauty of our regions, that they, the people who make up the very soul and identity of our nation, in their own backyard shared their own unique moment of history with a legend. Regional Australia will be devastated by Her Majesty's passing, but can take great comfort she is at peace. Moments in history like this are an occasion for deep reflection, and as we reflect on Her Majesty's life, what we see is an incredible record of service, sacrifice and accomplishment. As Australians, it's worth remembering how blessed we are to live in a society which is defined by a set of core fundamental principles which have built our nation into what it is today. Australia is the lucky country, and part of that luck has been due to the fact that Her Majesty has been able to reign over us. The stability Her Majesty has provided has improved the lives of many. Freedom of speech, freedom of conscience and a free, robust democratic system of government. We owe these values to the United Kingdom, and to Her Majesty was the proud and living embodiment of them. And it is by staying true to these values as Australians that the memory of Queen Elizabeth II will always live in our hearts. This is a sad time as we now say our final goodbye, and goodbyes are always hard. But as we grieve for Her Majesty, we also say thank you. Thank you for your remarkable leadership. Thank you for your immense contribution to our nation and our history, for your love, loyalty and sacrifice. Mr Speaker, I would like to finish by quoting a message of condolence that was left in my electorate office in Dalby by Mr Arthur Cootes. To their Royal Highnesses, our deepest heartfelt sympathies to all on the passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. I had the honour of serving as a soldier under her and took pride in my service for her. Never forgotten and always loved. Vale, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.
I understand it is the wish of honourable members to signify at this stage their respect and sympathy by rising in their places, and I ask all present to do so. I thank the House. The question is that the motion moved by the Honourable the Prime Minister be agreed to, and I give the call to the Leader of the House.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. It was not appropriate at the start when I was moving the procedural motions to give a speech explaining what the arrangements for the day would be, so I'll do that now so that the House is aware, but I thank the House for allowing that to go through without debate. It was just important that the Prime Minister's moving speech be the first speech of the day. This will be the only issue that we deal with today. Speeches are 5 minutes. The tradition historically has actually been it's only been leaders' speeches, and we finish up quite early. But there has been an understandable wish from members that there are a significant number of people who would like to add additional comments, and that's why we've gone for a different procedure to what's happened, although it's some years since the House has had to use the protocols for an event such as this. At the end of the debate, it will simply be dealt with on the voices, and the House will automatically adjourn. There will be no adjournment debate today. And I also raise the protocol with respect to which many members will want to make speeches. I suspect more members will be in attendance. There is within the resolution that the House carried earlier today the standard clause that the arrangements can be varied on a motion moved by a minister. No one should be concerned about that. That's just part of it, as it always is. There is no intention for there to be any further divisions or any quorums or anything like that during the course of the day. In saying so, I just add that for those members who feel that the leaders' speeches have in fact dealt with the issues that they want to raise, then that's understood, and there's no disrespect from any members who may choose to not wish to make a speech today. In doing so, I'd simply add on behalf of the people of Watson my condolences and deepest respect